Welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, I want you to imagine a being who does absolutely everything for their own glory.
Right.
Just picture an entity that demands the entire universe exist for the single, unyielding purpose of praising them.
Yeah, I mean, in human terms, if you met someone who operated like that, you would call them a monster.
You really would. You would label them a narcissist of the highest order.
Absolutely.
But today, we're doing a deep dive into an 18th century text that argues this specific trait, God making himself his own highest goal, is the absolute center of reality.
It is a massive claim.
And more than that, the text claims this divine self-regard is the only reason you are capable of feeling joy at all.
Oh, wow.
We are opening up a massive paradigm-shifting work by Jonathan Edwards. It is his dissertation concerning the end for which God created the world.
Such a heavy piece of writing.
It is. And our mission in this deep dive is to unpack the mechanics of that claim. We want to show you how the Creator's relentless pursuit of his own glory is, well, it is the fountain of all human goodness.
It really requires a massive shift in perspective to grasp what Edwards is doing here.
Right.
As adherents to the Westminster Confession, we view all of existence, history, and creation through a specific lens, which is the absolute sovereignty of God. And this text gets to the core of that worldview by asking a teleological question.
A teleological question. So, dealing with ends or purposes.
That is right. Edwards is not asking how God made the world or when he made it. He is asking about the final end.
The eternal why.
Yes, the motive in the divine mind before a single star burned or a single atom moved.
Which is mind-bending to even try to think about.
It is. And for anyone listening who feels, intimidated by 18th century philosophical theology, we are going to translate the logic step by step.
Yeah, do not worry. We are going to break it all down.
Because the claims Edwards makes touch every aspect of how you view your daily life. They touch your reason for existing and your eternal future.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we need to tackle the biggest intellectual hurdle right out of the gate.
The narcissism objection.
Yes, the narcissism objection. When modern people hear the phrase, God does everything for his own glory, human sensibilities throw up immediate red flags.
They do, because we instinctively map our human experience onto God.
Right. If I set myself up as the highest good in the universe, and I demand that everyone around me acknowledge my greatness, I am delusional.
You would be demanding something that does not belong to you.
So when Edwards argues that it aligns with perfect reason for God to set himself highest in all his proceedings, how do we reconcile that with our definition of goodness?
It is a fair question.
How is it not just cosmic selfishness?
Well, the human analogy fails entirely because it applies finite categories to an infinite reality.
I think.
Think about why it is wrong for a human being to be obsessed with their own glory. It is wrong because human beings are flawed, limited, and dependent on things outside themselves.
We are not the source of our own goodness.
Precisely. When a human claims supreme glory, they are living a lie. But God possesses an infinite fullness of good. He is the objective standard of beauty, justice, truth, and perfection.
So he is the standard.
Right. Edwards points out that because God is infinitely good, his infinite love for himself is simply a love for the highest possible good that exists.
It is an accurate assessment of reality, then.
That is the perfect way to put it. It is an accurate assessment. If God were to love something else more than he loves himself, he would be loving a lesser good over a greater good.
The math changes completely when you deal with an infinite, uncreated being.
It really does.
If God is the absolute highest good, then for him to value creation higher than himself would be an error in judgment.
It would be a lie.
Yeah, it would mean he was confused about the hierarchy of value in the universe.
And God cannot be confused.
Right. In theological terms, if God valued you or me more than he valued himself, God would be committing idolatry.
Oh, that is a striking way to phrase it.
He would be worshiping the creature rather than the creator.
Yeah.
So his self-regard is not arrogance, it is pure, unadulterated truth.
What's fascinating here is how Edwards breaks down the logic regarding the exercise of God's attributes.
The exercise of attributes. Break that down for us.
So Edwards makes a massive distinction between possessing an attribute and exercising it.
Okay.
God does not just love his attributes in some abstract theoretical vacuum.
He does not just sit around thinking about how great he is.
Right. He does not just sit in eternity loving the idea that he is wise or the idea that he is just. He loves the operation and the exercise of those attributes.
Give me an example of that in human terms.
Think about a friend of yours. If you highly esteem your friend's wisdom and their sense of justice, you do not just admire those traits as abstract concepts in their head.
No, of course not.
You naturally delight in seeing that friend act wisely. You delight in seeing them act justly in the real world.
You want to see it in action.
Right. The excellency of those virtues consists in their relation to use and operation.
That makes complete sense. If you love a musician's talent, you want them to pick up the instrument and play.
Yes.
You do not want them to sit silently in a room just possessing the talent. You want the talent actualized.
You want the music to fill the room.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I mean, absolutely.
Edwards applies that logic to the Creator. If God esteems and delights in his own perfections, he must value and delight in the expressions and genuine effects of them. Therefore, when God delights in the expression of his perfections, he is manifesting a delight in himself.
So creation is the music.
Yes, creating the universe is God picking up the instrument and playing. It is the active exercise of his infinite attributes. And in making these expressions of his own perfections his end, he makes himself his end.
That brings us to the next massive concept in the text. If God naturally delights in the exercise of his own perfections, what is the logical next step for those perfections once they are exercised?
You have to go somewhere.
Right. Once the music is being played, it must be heard.
Yeah.
Once the attributes are exercised, they must be seen and acknowledged.
That is the logical flow.
Edwards writes that a being who highly prizes their own excellencies must be well pleased to have those excellencies known, acknowledged, esteemed, and prized by others.
Loving a thing naturally brings a desire for the approbation of that thing.
But I have to push back here a little bit,
Go for it.
or at least voice the skepticism that comes up for anyone hearing this for the first time.
It is a natural reaction.
If God desires his attributes to be seen and praised by creatures, does that mean God is needy?
Right, the needy God objection.
Yeah. Was he lonely before he created angels and humans? Did he lack an audience to validate his self-worth?
This is where the Reformed doctrine of God's complete self-sufficiency is vital to keep in view. God is entirely complete within the eternal fellowship of the Trinity.
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yes, they have existed in perfect, joyous, infinite communion forever. God lacks nothing.
So no loneliness.
Zero loneliness. And he does not suffer from low self-esteem requiring external validation.
That is a relief.
When Edwards says God is well pleased to have his excellencies known and prized, this desire is not born out of a deficit. It is born out of the objective fitness of the situation.
The objective fitness of the situation. That word fitness feels like a piece of 18th century jargon.
It does sound a bit archaic.
Can you break down what Edwards means by the fitness of the situation?
It means that it is objectively proper and right that ultimate beauty be seen and praised.
Like it is just the way things should be.
Right. It is the way reality ought to function. If a breathtaking masterpiece of art is painted, it is fitting that there are eyes to see it and minds to appreciate it.
I see.
This is not because the painting has an ego and needs compliments, but because the supreme beauty of the painting demands an appropriate response from conscious beings.
Because to ignore it would be wrong.
Absolutely. Edwards argues that if a being loves himself and highly prizes his own excellencies, it is objectively fit that he should take delight in his own excellencies being seen, acknowledged, esteemed, and delighted in.
So God is just acting in accordance with what is most fitting.
Yes. And in making this acknowledgement, his end, God is still making himself his end.
Think about what happens in your own heart when you witness something genuinely great. Imagine standing at the edge of a massive mountain range for the first time.
Or watching an athlete execute a physical feat that defies gravity.
Right. The natural reflex of the human heart is to express awe. You gasp. You cheer.
You turn to the person next to you and demand that they look at it too.
Yes, you naturally want to praise the greatness you just witnessed. C.S. Lewis talked extensively about this concept.
He really did.
He argued that praise is not something God demands of us, like a tyrant demanding taxes. Praise is inner health made audible.
That is such a great quote. Inner health made audible.
It is the natural culmination of joy. God created the world so that this natural, joyous reflex of praise would have an infinite, worthy object.
He did not create you because he needed a cheering section.
No, he created you so that your capacity for joy would be filled to the brim by seeing and praising the most beautiful reality in existence.
That framing captures the heart of Edwards' argument beautifully.
Thanks.
And as we move further into the text, having established that God wants his glory seen, we run into what looks like a chronological
A
paradox.
paradox.
Yeah, and Edwards anticipates this objection. If God created beings specifically to see and praise his glory, how could God act out of love for those creatures before those creatures even existed?
Oh, that is a good point.
You cannot direct affection toward an object that is not there. You cannot look at a void and feel love for something that has no reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Edwards makes a sharp distinction between two different ways of thinking about God's love.
He says.
He distinguishes between God's benevolence in a larger sense and God's love in a strict sense.
This is a crucial distinction.
I'm going to spend some time on this because understanding this distinction changes how you view God's initial motive for creation.
So, in the larger sense, benevolence signifies a general disposition in God's nature to communicate his own fullness.
Just a general outgoing of his nature.
Right. It is an internal disposition to cause an emanation of his glory. Edwards points out that this general disposition must be prior to the existence of any created being.
It has to come first.
Yes, it is the inciting cause of giving existence to other beings. On the other hand, love in a strict sense, what Edwards sometimes calls complacence, presupposes the existence of the object beloved.
At least in idea and expectation.
Right. God did not look out into the empty void, see the human race, feel a sudden burst of affection or pity for us, and then decide to create the universe to help us out.
Because that puts the creature in the driver's seat.
It does, and that goes against everything we know about God's sovereignty.
Right. You cannot pity a non-existent thing.
No, you cannot.
Edwards uses some incredible natural analogies to illustrate this general disposition of benevolence. He talks about a tree.
A great analogy.
The nature in a tree by which it puts forth buds, shoots out branches, and brings forth leaves and fruit is a disposition that terminates in its own complete self.
The tree is just doing what a tree does by nature.
Or think about the sun. The disposition in the sun to shine, to abundantly diffuse its fullness, its warmth, and its brightness, is simply a tendency to its own most glorious and complete state.
It is not a reaction to the darkness.
Right. The sun does not shine because it looks down and feels sorry for the dark planets orbiting it. The sun shines because the atomic reality of the sun is to be brilliantly, overwhelmingly radiant.
Emitting light is its nature. I want to focus on a specific phrase Edwards uses here, the propensity to himself diffused.
Propensity to himself diffused.
That concept crushes any human-centric view of the universe.
It really does.
For centuries, human beings have wanted to believe that we are the absolute center of the story.
It is our default setting, you know?
We want to believe that God's primary motivation was a reaction for our intrinsic value. But Edwards shows that God's general disposition to communicate his goodness was the fountain from which the creation of angels and humans flowed.
Creating beings was simply the mechanism for his glory to emanate.
Precisely. He had a propensity to see his own glory diffused outward. Man is not the center of the universe.
The emanation of God's glory is the center of the universe.
Yeah.
That is a massive theological shift for a lot of people.
It is a heavy thing to process.
But it brings up a thought that feels almost terrifying.
What is that?
If the universe is entirely about God's glory emanating outward, if it is all about him making himself his own end, where does that leave the creature? Where does that leave you and me? Are we just tools? Are we just inanimate mirrors set up in an empty room so God can look at his own reflection?
That does sound cold and mechanical.
It sounds a little bleak, but Edwards answers this by showing how God's goals and our highest good are not in conflict at all. In fact, they are the exact same thing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, specifically within Westminster theology, we see this harmony clearly.
Yes, let's bring in the Westminster Catechism.
Look at the very first question of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. It asks, what is the chief end of man?
And the answer is, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever.
Notice the phrasing there. It does not say the chief end is to glorify God as a burdensome duty, and then, as a separate reward, find a way to enjoy him.
They are put together.
The glorifying and the enjoying are inextricably linked. Edwards writes that God acting for himself, or making himself his last end, and his acting for the creature's sake, are not to be set in opposition.
They coincide.
Yes, they are implied in one another. God's general inclination to diffuse himself becomes actualized in his specific benevolence toward his elect creatures.
Edwards uses this stunning analogy from the book of Genesis, looking at Adam and Eve.
I love this part of the text.
He notes that the church is called the fullness of Christ. He says God looks on the communication of himself to belong to the fullness and completeness of himself as though he were not in his most glorious state without it.
Just like Adam was not in his complete state without Eve.
Yes. It is striking that God considers the communication of himself to the church as belonging to his own completeness, in the same way a husband views his bride.
It changes the whole tone of the discussion.
The creature is not an afterthought or a cold tool. The creature is comprehended in God.
That phrase, comprehended in God, carries immense weight.
Unpack that a bit.
It means the creature's true well-being is swallowed up in God's pursuit of his own glory.
Hmm.
Consider the mechanics of this. What is God actually doing when he pursues his glory? He is diffusing infinite goodness outward. He is radiating perfect truth, perfect beauty, and perfect joy.
Right.
If you are the recipient of that infinite goodness, your joy and God's glory are perfectly synchronized. God's pursuit of his own maximum glory requires him to give you maximum joy.
Let's move from the abstract idea of diffusion to the practical reality of what is being diffused into the creature.
Getting down to brass tacks.
Yeah. When Edwards talks about the emanation of divine fullness, what does that look like in your daily life? How do you experience it sitting in traffic or talking with your family?
Good question.
Edwards breaks down this divine fullness into three distinct categories that are communicated to the creature: knowledge, holiness, and happiness.
Knowledge, holiness, and happiness.
But these are not just a random list of traits. They flow into each other. They operate as a chain reaction in the human soul.
The first link in that chain reaction is knowledge.
Okay, starting with the mind.
Edwards states that the communicated knowledge which pertains to God's last end is the creature's knowledge of God himself. He argues that even the faculty of understanding would be vain without this specific object. A mind exists to know truth, and God is the ultimate truth.
He uses that beautiful sunbeam analogy again.
She is a perfect illustration.
He says our knowledge of God is just a participation in God's own infinite knowledge of himself.
Obviously, it is immensely less in degree.
Right, like a single beam of light compared to the roaring furnace of the sun itself. But it is the same kind of light.
Yes.
Think about the mechanics of that. When you grasp a true concept about who God is, when you read a passage of Scripture and a light bulb goes off in your head about his justice or his mercy, your mind is actually participating in the knowledge that God has of his own nature.
And that grasp of truth inevitably forces a reaction, which brings us to the second category, holiness.
So knowledge leads to holiness.
Yes. Edwards defines creaturely holiness according to the text. It consists primarily in love to God.
Not just following rules.
Right. It is exercised in a high esteem of God, an admiration of his perfections, complacency in them, and praise of them.
Though it is an affection.
When your mind apprehends the absolute beauty of God through knowledge, your will and your affections must respond. All of these responses are nothing else but the heart exalting, magnifying, or glorifying God.
I love the jewel analogy he uses for this concept of holiness.
It paints such a clear picture.
Edwards says a jewel held in the sun's beams derives and participates in the sun's brightness.
Right.
Think about the physics of a diamond. A diamond sitting in a pitch-black room has no visible beauty. It generates zero light on its own.
It is just a hard piece of carbon.
But when you place it in the direct sunlight, the angles and the cuts of the stone catch the beams and it blazes with light.
It refracts the sun's glory.
It participates in the sun's brightness. When your heart loves God, when it is acting in true virtue and holiness, you are the jewel catching the sunlight.
You are reflecting the moral excellency of the divine nature.
You are not generating your own independent goodness. You are refracting his.
This refraction of light leads directly to the third category, happiness.
Knowledge, holiness, and now happiness.
Edwards writes that another part of God's fullness which he communicates is his happiness. This happiness consists in enjoying and rejoicing in himself, and so does the creature's happiness. Joy is not a secular emotion that we occasionally spiritualize on Sundays. According to this text, joy, or the exulting of the heart in God's glory, is one thing that intrinsically belongs to praise.
Joy is praise.
Yes. The happiness of the creature consists in rejoicing in God, by which also God is magnified and exalted.
The joy is the praise. So think about this when you are going through your week.
It makes it so practical.
When you experience genuine joy in God, when you are singing a hymn and your heart suddenly swells with affection, or when your mind grasps a complex theological truth and you feel a genuine spark of awe, You are quite literally partaking in the physical emanation of God's own internal happiness.
You are feeling a derived beam of the joy that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have shared for all eternity. It makes the spiritual life intensely tangible. Every moment of true understanding, true virtue, and true joy is a direct participation in the divine fullness.
It is all connected.
God is all in all with respect to each part of that communication. What is communicated is divine, or something of God, and each communication unites the creature to him.
So the knowledge, the holiness, and the happiness are all threads of the same divine beam of light hitting the human soul. Which brings us to the climax of this entire deep dive.
The eternal view.
If this communication of fullness, this chain reaction of knowledge, holiness, and happiness is the goal of creation, what happens when it stretches out across eternity?
Right, because we are not talking about a temporary arrangement.
No, we are talking about the permanent, unending state of the universe.
Edwards addresses this with breathtaking vision. He argues that God's aim is an increasing communication of himself through all eternity.
Increasing, not static.
Right. There are many reasons to think that what God has in view is an increasing knowledge of God, love to him, and joy in him. The more those divine communications increase in the creature, the more the creature becomes one with God. The heart is drawn nearer and nearer, the union becomes more firm and close, and the creature becomes more conformed to God. The good that is in the creature comes forever nearer and nearer to an identity with that which is in God.
So what does this all mean for eternity? I think about the math of infinity.
It is staggering to consider.
Because God is infinite, his depths can never be fully plumbed. He is an endless ocean of beauty, truth, and, well, everything.
Right, there is no bottom to that ocean.
That means a finite creature can spend forever, literally millions upon billions of years, growing in knowledge, growing in love, and growing in joy.
You will be getting nearer and nearer to the source.
Experiencing higher and higher heights of happiness, but you will never exhaust the source. It is an eternal ascent.
It is like an asymptote in calculus.
Yes. The line gets closer and closer to the axis for infinity, but never touches it. It never gets boring. It never peaks. It is an infinitely rising curve of joy.
This raises an important question about how God views this entire process from his vantage point outside of time.
Because God sees the end from the beginning.
Right. Because God has a comprehensive prospect of eternity. He sees the whole picture at once. He perfectly sees the whole of it in its infinite progress and increase.
He sees the whole timeline.
Therefore, in the eyes of God, this increasing union must come to an eminent fulfillment of Christ's request in John 17, where Jesus prays, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me and I in thee, that they also may be one in us.
That is the high priestly prayer from the Gospel of John.
It is.
It is the most intimate glimpse we ever get into the intertrinitarian dialogue. The Son speaking to the Father. And the stated goal for the Church is union.
Edwards leans heavily on that concept of union. He says that in this view, those elect creatures must be viewed as being, as it were, one with God. They are respected as brought home to him, united with him, centering most perfectly and swallowed up in him, so that his respect to them finally coincides and becomes one and the same with respect to himself.
He uses the analogy of a man's family, right?
She does. The interest of a man's family is looked upon as the same with his own interests because of their strict union with him.
If you hurt a man's children, you hurt the man.
Well, absolutely. Their well-being is his well-being. But God's elect creatures, with respect to their eternal duration, are infinitely dearer to God than a man's family is to him. The interest of the creature becomes God's own interest.
Let me concisely recap the massive ground we have covered today.
We have covered a lot.
We started by asking a teleological question about why the universe exists. We saw that God's highest regard for himself is the very engine of creation. By desiring to diffuse his own infinite knowledge, his own holiness, and his own joy outward, he created you to be the receiver and the reflector of that exact glory.
He is the sun, and you are the jewel catching the light.
Yes. We discovered that the goals of God's self-exaltation and the creature's highest possible joy are not at odds. They perfectly coincide. Because all things are from God as their first cause, they all tend back to him as their lost end.
As we conclude, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the mechanics Edwards has laid out. If it is true that every moment of true understanding, every act of real love, and every flash of pure joy you experience is actually a derived beam from God's own internal fullness, how does that alter the way you look at a perfectly ordinary, quiet Tuesday?
Oh, that is good.
Think about what it means that your mind and your heart are the very canvas on which God is painting his eternal glory.
Mm-hmm.
Even in your most mundane tasks, your capacity to know, to love, and to rejoice is tied directly to the infinite heartbeat of the Creator. You are participating in the life of God every time you experience true joy.
That is a staggering reality to carry with you into your week. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material on Reformed thinking. We will catch you next time.